First of all, I just wanted to say that I appreciate the public advocate talking about being in therapy. I've been in therapy for 18 years. I plan to be a lifer. And I always say to my own children that healthy people are in therapy for life. And that if you're not in therapy, you're much more likely to be unhealthy, to not get the support that you need. So I'm all for being very open about the support, the social services that we all deserve and need, and that requires resources and time. So I can talk a little bit about the supply and the demand, because we do both, and I'll try to be brief. On the supply side, a lot of people talk about gun laws and they talk about how they don't work, right? Because it does seem like they're not working. We have so much gun violence every single day. We hear about all this gun violence is happening all across the country. We have strong gun laws in some places, weak gun laws in others. We still have gun violence here in New York City. How can that be? And the way that I explain that gun laws work is pretty straightforward. Whether you work in policy or law, or you work, with communities, you know that in New York City and in cities across the state that do have high rates of gun violence, most of those guns do not originate here. It's not as though someone is going into a brick and mortar gun dealer shop, right? And buying a gun and getting a background check and then going and selling, 100 guns in a truck in Brownsville. The reason that traffickers go down to Florida, go down to North Carolina, go down to South Carolina, go to Virginia, or even go over to Ohio is because it's so easy to get them there legally. You don't have to go through a background check. And Florida now, in fact, the governor just signed a law that allows you to, without a background check and without a permit, carry in public. You could be just carrying a gun around in public without a permit in the state of Florida. And so, if you can legally go to other states and easily buy a gun, then of course you're going to be able to traffic them into neighborhoods where we know that there's that powerlessness, where we know that there's that despair, where we know that there's that historical and structural racism that everyone's talking about here. People are going to feel afraid in those neighborhoods. People are going to feel like they need to protect themselves, right? And so just statistically, we know that over 80% of the crime guns the guns that are used in crimes, whether it's a shooting or actually kills someone here in the city of New York and in cities across the state, are coming from out of state. And that's how I know that gun laws here in New York are working, because otherwise we just get them here, right? And then on top of that, okay, we're talking about that being mixed with all of these other strict structural risk factors that we know from all the public health research, and we know from the actual anecdotal conversations and research that we're seeing out in the community, are mixed with that easy access to guns, those guns on the market, right? If you live in an area where there's high rates of poverty, high rates of unemployment, high rates of historical redlining, historical structural racism, right? Lack of access to education, lack of access to healthcare. Those neighborhoods are specifically much more likely to be targeted by the gun trafficking trade, and those neighborhoods are much more likely to have folks who are going to feel like they need to pick up a gun. Now, this is something that's not often talked about, and I like to say it out loud. Most people in this country still think that guns protect you. So, and we have a Supreme Court, right, that says that guns protect you. We have a policing system that says that guns protect you. We have a military that says guns protect you. So why do we think that we can go into a neighborhood with young, powerless black men and tell them that guns don't protect them just because they can go through a background check, right? That's a very difficult tale to tell. Guns don't protect you. They actually don't, right? We know that when a mass shooter is going into a school, their security carrying guns, they're not going to actually be able to protect them from that intrusion, right? We know that a gun in the home is far more likely to lead to suicide, an accident, domestic violence, a murder, than it is to actually prevent an intrusion. But the reality is, people are afraid, and if we did a poll, I know, of students in New York City a couple years ago on why there was an increase in trying to get weapons into the school, whether it was guns or knives or whatever it might be. And the reality is most of those kids were carrying those weapons because they were afraid. They were afraid of someone hurting them, whether it was someone they knew or someone they didn't know. It was not because they wanted to hurt someone else. And so when you have easy access to guns and easy access to weapons, but especially easy access to guns, which are far more likely to actually result in death, that is going to increase levels of violence. And you need those factors together, much more likely than not, for there to actually be a result in a violent behavior. As the public advocate said, mental health alone, a diagnosis of mental illness, is much more likely to be associated with a victim of gun violence, like we saw on the train, right? Like just a month ago. And that happens all the time. It's someone who doesn't have control over themselves, who is in a crisis. Not only are they more likely to be a victim, but they're also less likely to actually be able to protect themselves even if they had a weapon. So I want to pass the mic again, but we work on both of those sides, and I think it's important to talk about both, because if the guns weren't there, we know there wouldn't be gun violence. There would be some violence, but there would not be gun violence, and so we need to do both.
Thank you. I think it's important to point out